The chill of the great hall was a familiar ache in my bones, a cold that had little to do with the stone walls of the Frostfang citadel and everything to do with the life I was forced to lead. 17 years I had drawn breath, and for every one of them I had been property. My name was Ilara, though names were a luxury for the free. To the masters of the Northern Trading Guild I was simply inventory. The proof was seared into the delicate skin of my nape, a stylized onyx wolf's head, the brand of the guild. It was a mark of damnation, a permanent declaration that my body, my will, and my future belonged to them. I stood now with a dozen other slaves, heads bowed, hands clasped, invisible and yet painfully on display. Northern delegates, clad in heavy furs and smelling of spiced wine, bargained and postured around us. They spoke of trade routes, of encroaching war with the Eastern alliances, and of the untamed wolf packs of the Western mountains. To them we were no different from the barrels of ale or crates of or being discussed, assets to be leveraged. My master, Lord Valerius, a man whose cruelty was matched only by his ambition, paced nearby. His voice was a low growl as he negotiated with a portly merchant. "Her kind is resilient," he said, gesturing vaguely in my direction. "Bred for labor. She'll serve you well until her strength gives out." I flinched, my gaze fixed on the grimy flagstones. Bred for labor. The words were a brand of their own, scarring my soul as the hot iron had scarred my skin. I had long ago abandoned any hope of a different life. Hope was a dangerous, fragile thing, and the guild was ruthlessly efficient at crushing it. My world was one of chains, both seen and unseen, and I believed I was born to wear them forever. A sudden hush fell over the hall. The boisterous negotiations ceased, the clatter of goblets died. A palpable wave of cold, predatory power washed through the room, silencing everyone. The great oak doors at the far end of the hall swung open, and a figure strode in, flanked by two colossal guards in obsidian armor. He was a king, that much was obvious from his bearing alone. Tall and broad-shouldered, he moved with a fluid grace that was utterly at odds with his formidable size. He wore no crown, only a simple circlet of blackened iron that did little to tame his wild night-dark hair. His eyes, the color of molten gold, swept the room with an unnerving intensity, missing nothing. This was King Kalen Varys, the Alpha King of the Obsidian Peaks, a man whispered to be more beast than human. The Northern Lords, so arrogant moments before, now seemed to shrink in his presence. His reputation preceded him, a brutal warrior who had united the warring Western clans through sheer force of will. He was a force of nature, and he had just walked into the heart of his rival's territory. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage of bone. This was a predator of the highest order, and we, the slaves, were the lowest form of prey. His golden eyes continued their sweep, and then, for a reason I would never comprehend, they stopped. On me. Chapter 2, The Alpha's Claim. Time seemed to warp, stretching and thinning until the only things in the universe were the Alpha King's stare and the frantic, terrified beat of my own heart. His gaze was not like the leering looks of masters or the dismissive glances of merchants. It was heavy, a physical weight that pinned me in place. It was analytical, as if he were peeling back the layers of grime and servitude to see the very marrow of my bones. I saw a flicker of something in those molten depths, recognition, disbelief, and a shocking possessive fire. A nervous murmur rippled through the assembled lords. Lord Valerius, my master, stepped forward with a strained smile. "King Kalen," he began, his voice oozing a false welcome. "An unexpected honor. We were not aware you would be gracing the summit yourself." Kalen ignored him completely. His focus remained locked on me, and he took a deliberate step forward. Then another. The hall held its breath. With every step he took, a strange, primal hum vibrated through my body. It was a terrifying, exhilarating sensation, like the low thrum of a coming storm. He moved like a wolf stalking its quarry, silent, purposeful, and utterly dominant. He stopped directly in front of me, so close I could feel the heat radiating from his body and smell the crisp, wild scent of pine and cold mountain air that clung to him. I trembled, my eyes still fixed on the floor, certain I had done something to draw the wrath of this fearsome king. Perhaps my gaze had lingered a moment too long. Perhaps my very existence was an offense. "Look at me," he commanded. His voice was a low, resonant growl that vibrated deep in my chest. It was not a request. To disobey was unthinkable. Slowly my head lifted and I met his gaze. Up close, his eyes were even more intense, flecked with shards of amber and black. I saw my own terrified reflection in them. He studied my face, his expression unreadable, before his gaze drifted to the exposed nape of my neck, to the ugly raised scar of the guild's brand. A muscle in his jaw clenched and the fire in his eyes blazed hotter. He reached out and a collective gasp echoed in the hall. His fingers, calloused and strong, gently brushed against the brand. It was not the cruel prodding of a master, but a touch that was strangely reverent. A jolt, hot and electric, shot through me at the contact. A searing shock that had nothing to do with pain and everything to do with a sudden, overwhelming connection to this man. Lord Valerius finally found his voice, sputtering with outrage. "Your Majesty, that is my property. You have no..." "Silence," Kalen snarled without looking away from me. The single word cracked through the hall like a whip, and my master flinched back as if struck. King Kalen's golden eyes met mine again and the world fell away. "This one," he declared, his voice ringing with absolute, unshakable authority that left no room for argument. "This one is mine." Chapter 3. The Scent of Pine and Power. Chaos erupted. Lord Valerius's face turned a mottled shade of purple, his sputtered protests swallowed by the shocked outcries of the other northern delegates. To them, King Kalen's declaration was not just an insult. It was a raid, a plundering of property in the heart of their citadel. But the Alpha King's obsidian-clad guards moved to flank him, their hands resting on the hilts of their great swords, their stony expressions a clear warning. No one dared to physically challenge the claim. I was paralyzed, caught in the eye of the storm. The word echoed in the ringing silence of my mind. I had always been someone's property, but the way Kalen had said it was different. It was not the casual ownership of a master claiming a tool. It was the raw, guttural possessiveness of a dragon claiming its hoard. Before I could process another thought, Kalen's hand moved from my neck to my arm, his grip firm but not painful. He pulled me from the line of slaves, drawing me to his side as if I belonged there. The delegates parted before us as he strode back toward the great doors, his momentum unstoppable. I stumbled to keep up, my worn leather slippers scraping against the stone. I risked a glance back at Lord Valerius, who stared at me with pure, unadulterated hatred. A shiver of fear, cold and sharp, cut through my shock. I had been his. Now I was the Alpha King's. I had simply been traded from one cage to another. I was led not to a dungeon, but up winding stone staircases to a suite of rooms that were more luxurious than anything I had ever imagined. A fire roared in a massive hearth, casting a warm glow on rich tapestries and dark, polished wood. Kalen dismissed his guards with a jerk of his head, and the heavy door boomed shut, leaving the two of us utterly alone. The sudden intimacy was suffocating. He finally released my arm and prowled to the fire, his back to me. The silence stretched, thick with unspoken tension. I stood frozen by the door, painfully aware of my filth and rags in this opulent space. "There is a bathing chamber through that door," he said, his voice softer now but still carrying that low, rumbling timbre. "The servants have brought water." Washington. It was an order, but it felt like a gift. I scurried into the adjoining room, a space of marble and steam. A large copper tub was filled with hot, fragrant water. For a moment I could only stare. The last time I'd had a proper bath was too long ago to recall. Hesitantly, I shed my threadbare tunic, the only garment I owned, and sank into the water. The heat was a blissful shock, melting away the grime and the deep, persistent chill in my bones. I scrubbed my skin raw, desperate to wash away the stench of servitude, the touch of my former masters, the phantom feel of the brand on my neck. When I finally emerged, wrapped in a thick linen towel, my skin was pink and tingling. Returning to the main chamber, I found a simple but clean woolen dress laid out on the bed. Kalen was standing by the window staring out at the falling snow. He turned as I entered and his golden eyes raked over me. It was not a lecherous gaze, but it was intensely male, assessing and proprietary. A hot blush stained my cheeks. I was clean, I was warm, and I was alone with the most powerful and dangerous man I had ever met. And I had no idea why. Chapter 4. The Heart of the Moon. I quickly pulled the simple gray dress over my head. The wool was soft against my newly clean skin, a simple luxury that felt like a sin. King Kalen watched my every move, his silence a heavy cloak in the firelit room. The suspense was a knot tightening in my stomach. Why had he done this? Was it a political power play, a way to humiliate the Northern Guild? Was I merely a pawn in a game I couldn't comprehend? He finally moved, crossing the room in 3 long silent strides. He stopped before me, and my instinct, honed by years of abuse, was to cower. I forced myself to remain still, my chin held high, though my heart was a frantic drum against my ribs. "You are afraid," he stated. It wasn't a question. "You are the king of the Obsidian Peaks," I whispered, my voice hoarse. It would be foolish not to be. A flicker of something, approval? Respect? Passed through his golden eyes. "I will not harm you, Alara." Hearing my name from his lips sent a strange shiver through me. He said it as if it mattered. But it was the other part of his statement that stunned me. He knew my name. Slaves were rarely afforded such a courtesy. How could he possibly know it? As he stood there, a peculiar warmth began to spread across my chest. It started as a faint tickle, then intensified into a pleasant, pulsing heat. My hand instinctively went to the source, my fingers closing around the small, smooth stone I wore on a leather thong hidden beneath my clothes. It was a simple, dark, unremarkable rock, my only possession from a life I couldn't remember. It had always been cool to the touch. Now in the king's presence it felt alive. Kalen's eyes narrowed, his gaze dropping to my hand. "What is that?" Before I could answer, the door to the suite burst open. 2 of Lord Valerius's personal guards stormed in, their swords drawn. "The girl comes with us," the first one snarled, his eyes filled with menace. "By order of the guild." I cried out, scrambling backward, but the second man lunged for me. In a blur of motion too fast for the human eye to follow, Kalen was between us. He didn't draw a weapon. He didn't need one. He caught the guard's sword arm, and the crack of bone breaking was sickeningly loud in the sudden silence. The man screamed, his sword clattering to the floor. The other guard, momentarily frozen in shock, let out a war cry and charged. Kalen moved again, a low, feral growl tearing from his throat. His form seemed to shimmer, to expand, and for a split second the face that turned to the attacking guard was more wolf than man, his canines elongated, his golden eyes blazing with primal fury. He backhanded the man with such force that he was thrown across the room, crashing into the stone wall and slumping to the floor in a heap. It was over in seconds. Kalen stood over the 2 groaning men, his chest heaving, the air around him crackling with raw, untamed power. He was terrifying. He was magnificent. And he had just protected me. He turned back to me, the feral cast of his features slowly receding. His eyes, still burning with intensity, were fixed on the warm stone clutched in my hand. "That stone," he said, his voice a low, urgent growl. "Let me see it." Chapter 5. The Princess of Lunara. My fingers tightened around the stone, a sudden, fierce instinct to protect it rising within me. It was the only thing that was truly mine. But the man before me had just broken one guard's arm and nearly killed another for my sake. Trembling, I held out my hand, palm up. The stone lay there, a piece of polished darkness against my skin. In the firelight I could see it was no longer a flat, dull black. A faint, silvery light now pulsed within its depths, a tiny, captured moon waxing and waning in time with my heartbeat. Kalen didn't touch it. He stared at it with a raw, hungry intensity, his breath catching in his throat. It was the look of a man who has spent a lifetime searching for something and can scarcely believe he has found it. "The heart of the moon," he breathed, the words more of a prayer than a statement. His guards burst in, alerted by the commotion. They took in the scene, their king radiating power and the 2 crumpled forms of the northern guards. Without a word, they efficiently dragged the intruders from the room, their movements practiced and grim. The door boomed shut once more, plunging us back into a thick, charged silence. Kalen finally lifted his gaze from the stone to my face. The fire in his eyes was banked now, replaced by a complex storm of emotions I couldn't begin to decipher. "Where did you get this?" he asked, his voice tight. I don't know," I stammered, telling the truth. "I've always had it. It's the only thing I remember from before. Before the guild. Before the brand." He began to pace, his movements restless, caged. He ran a hand through his dark hair, the very picture of a man wrestling with a monumental revelation. "The Northern Guild raids the southern territories for their slaves. They have for decades, ever since the fall of the Silver Moon lineage. He spoke as if to himself, piecing together a puzzle whose picture only he could see. He stopped and turned to face me again, his eyes boring into mine. The brand on your neck. The gilt sigil is an onyx wolf. But the lines, the way they were carved into you, it's a deliberate corruption of another symbol. A desecration. My blood ran cold. What symbol? He stepped closer, his proximity once again making the moonstone in my hand pulse with warmth and light. He was so near I could see the flecks of amber in his irises, the slight tremor in his clenched jaw. The air hummed between us, a tangible force field of magic and suspense. He looked from the glowing stone in my palm, to the hated brand on my skin, and finally to my eyes. A dawning, impossible truth seemed to settle over him, solidifying his purpose. The royal crest of Lunara, he said, his voice low and heavy with meaning. A silver wolf's head, baying at a crescent moon. He held my gaze, his own burning with a question that threatened to shatter my entire reality. Tell me, slave, he commanded, his voice a silken, dangerous whisper. What do you know of the lost princess, Elina Silvermoon? Chapter 6. A name whispered in shadow. The name hung in the air between us. Elina Silvermoon. Meant nothing to me. Elina was a stranger, a ghost from a history I did not know. And yet, the moment Kaelin spoke the syllables, something fractured deep within my mind. A phantom memory, thin as smoke, curled at the edges of my consciousness. The scent of night-blooming jasmine, the soft, melodic hum of a woman's voice singing a wordless lullaby. It was gone as quickly as it came, leaving an ache of loss so profound it made my knees weak. I don't know that name, I whispered, clutching the moonstone so tightly my knuckles turned white. It pulsed against my skin, a warm, steady heartbeat in the palm of my hand. Are you certain? Kaelin pressed, his voice deceptively soft, but his golden eyes were piercing, searching for a truth I didn't believe I possessed. The Silver Moon dynasty ruled the southern kingdom of Lunara for 1,000 years. They were a line of powerful magic wielders, their blood intertwined with the cycles of the moon. 17 years ago, the Northern Trading Guild, greedy for their moonstone mines and fertile lands, swept down and slaughtered them all. His words painted a picture of fire and death. They murdered the king, the queen, and their infant daughter, Princess Elina. She was believed to have perished in the flames. My throat was dry. What does this have to do with me? He took a step closer, and the heat from the moonstone intensified, spreading up my arm and through my chest. This, he said, nodding toward the stone, is the heart of the moon. A royal artifact bound to the Silver Moon bloodline. Legend says it remains cold and dark as common rock, awakening only in the presence of two things: a true heir, and their fated mate. The implication was a physical blow. Me a princess? It was a lie. A cruel, impossible fantasy designed to break me more thoroughly than any whip. No, I choked out, shaking my head. You're wrong. I am a slave. Look at me. I held up my hands, showing him the calluses and scars. I turned my head, exposing the hideous brand on my neck. This is who I am. I was born to be a slave forever. You were born to be a queen, he countered, his voice a low, fierce growl that vibrated through the floor. They stole your life, your name. They branded you with a corrupted version of your own crest to mock a lineage they could never extinguish. He was too close. His sheer size, the raw power radiating from him, was overwhelming. His scent, that wild, clean mix of pine and winter air, filled my senses, making my head spin. And beneath it, for the first time, my own fear was mingled with something else. A strange, awakening scent that seemed to come from my own skin, starlight and crushed herbs. Kaelin's nostrils flared, his eyes darkening as he caught it. The wolf within him was reacting, drawn to a scent that called to his very soul. He visibly fought for control, a muscle feathering in his jaw. The raw, possessive desire in his gaze was terrifying, but for the first time in my life, I felt a spark of something other than fear in the face of a man's power. It was a dizzying, dangerous thrill. Chapter 7. The Gilded Cage. I woke to the unfamiliar sensation of soft linen and a heavy down-filled mattress. For a disorienting moment I thought I was dreaming. The fire in the hearth had been stoked, casting dancing shadows across the tapestried walls. Then I felt the gentle, persistent warmth of the moonstone against my chest and saw the simple woolen dress folded neatly on a chair. It was real. All of it. 2 servants, women with the quiet, watchful eyes of Kalen's people, entered with a tray of food and a set of new clothes. They offered me smoked fish, black bread, and cheese. They moved with a hesitant reverence that set my teeth on edge. I was used to being invisible or scorned, not served. I ate quickly, the rich food a strange comfort. The clothes they'd brought were not the stifling gowns of northern ladies but practical, dark green leggings and a soft leather tunic, cinched with a simple belt. They felt like armor. When Kalen entered, he found me staring out the window at the snow-blanketed courtyard of the citadel. "The northerners are in an uproar," he said without preamble, his voice a low rumble. "My claim on you has pushed them to the brink. For now we are barricaded in this wing. Guests in a gilded cage." He spent the next hours observing me, correcting me, training me. His methods were subtle but relentless. When my eyes drifted to the floor, he would say, "Look at me when I speak." A queen meets the eyes of her subjects and her enemies alike. When I hesitated to take a piece of fruit from a bowl, he instructed, "Take what is yours. You will never ask for permission to sustain yourself again." Each command was a small chip at the stone wall of my servitude, slowly, painstakingly carving out the shape of someone new. That evening we ate alone at a small table before the fire. The silence was a living thing, filled with the crackle of the flames and the unspoken tension between us. I was acutely aware of every move he made, the way he held his silver goblet, the focused intensity of his gaze as he watched me. My hands trembled as I reached for my own cup, and a splash of water spilled onto the table. Before I could even murmur an apology, his hand shot out and covered mine, steadying it. His fingers were warm and calloused, engulfing my own. A jolt, sharp and electric, shot up my arm. Beneath my tunic, the heart of the moon flared with a sudden, brilliant pulse of silver light, its heat searing through the fabric. Kalen's breath hitched, and his eyes flashed a startling, luminous gold. The air between us grew thick, crackling with a power that had a will of its own. It was the raw, undeniable pull of the mate bond, a force of nature that cared nothing for kings or slaves, only for the magnetic call of 2 souls destined to collide. Chapter 8: Scars and Secrets. The moment shattered as quickly as it had formed. Kalen withdrew his hand as if burned, and I snatched mine back, my heart hammering against my ribs. We finished the meal in a strained silence, the memory of that electric touch hanging between us. Later, as he stood staring into the fire, I found a sliver of courage. "Why?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "Why risk a war? Why go to such lengths for a story, a legend?" He turned from the flames, his face shadowed and grim. For a long moment he just looked at me, and I saw past the fearsome Alpha King to a man burdened by the weight of a crown. "It is not just a legend," he said, his voice raw. "My bloodline, the Varys clan, was sworn to the Silver Moons. We were their sworn shields, an unbreakable line of guardians. Our Alpha Kings were bound by a sacred oath to protect the royal family of Lunara." He looked away, his gaze fixed on a painful past. 17 years ago my father was Alpha King. He failed. He was lured away from the capital by false reports of an uprising on his own border, a deception orchestrated by the Guild. By the time he learned of the attack on Lunara, it was too late. The palace was ashes and the Silver Moon line was gone. The guilt of his ancestors was a palpable thing in the room. My family broke its oath. My father died with that shame. I will not. His words recontextualized everything. This wasn't just a political gambit or a conqueror's whim. It was the fulfillment of a sacred duty, a desperate attempt to right a generations-old wrong. His possessiveness was not just that of a mate. It was the fierce, unwavering loyalty of a guardian. "They have to pay," he growled, the sound deep in his chest. "For what they did to your family. And for what they did to you." His eyes drifted to my neck. "Pay I?" My breath caught. I gave a single hesitant nod. He stepped toward me and gently, with a reverence that made my soul ache, he tilted my head. His calloused fingers traced the raised, ugly lines of the brand. It was the first time anyone had touched the mark without cruelty, without reminding me of my status as property. He touched it as if it were a wound on his own skin. A low, feral snarl rumbled in his chest, an utterly terrifying sound of pure, unadulterated rage. I will make them answer for every moment of your pain, he vowed, his voice a lethal promise. Looking into his blazing golden eyes, I felt not fear, but a dizzying, unfamiliar sense of safety. He was my protector, my champion. And in that moment, staring up at this fierce, honor-bound king, I felt a powerful, reckless urge to reach out, to place my hand over his heart, and soothe the righteous fury he held on my behalf. Chapter 9. Whispers of War. The gilded cage began to feel smaller with each passing day. A grizzled, one-eyed wolf shifter named Gregor, Kalen's most trusted commander, was our only link to the outside world. He would slip in through secret passages bringing grim news. "The guild is screaming for your blood, my king," Gregor reported one evening, his voice a low growl. "Lord Valerius is painting you as a barbarian and a thief who stole his rightful property. He's demanding her immediate return." He glanced at me, his one good eye filled with a mixture of pity and awe. "They are rallying their armies. The Eastern blocs have sent envoys, eager to see how they can profit from a war between the North and West. The weight of it all pressed down on me. Armies. War. All because of me." A wave of nausea and terror washed over me, and the stone walls of the suite seemed to close in, squeezing the air from my lungs. I stumbled back, gasping, my vision tunneling. I was not a princess. I was not a catalyst for war. I was Alara, a slave who knew how to stay silent and invisible. That was all I was good for. Kalen saw my distress immediately. "Leave us, Gregor," he commanded. As the door shut, he turned to me. I was backed into a corner, trembling, my breath coming in ragged sobs. His first instinct was clear. The alpha in him wanted to command me to be calm, to force me into stillness. I saw the battle in his eyes. But he didn't. Instead, he did the last thing I ever would have expected. He lowered his massive frame to the floor, sitting a few feet away from me, not touching but creating a solid, unshakable perimeter of presence. He didn't speak of war or princesses. "In the Obsidian Peaks," he began, his voice a low, steady rumble that cut through my panic. "The wind sings a different song depending on which mountain it crosses. Over Mount Cinder it howls. Through the ironwood it whispers." He continued to speak, his deep voice a calming anchor in the storm of my fear. He told me of frozen waterfalls that shone like diamonds in the winter sun, of shadow cats hunting in the twilight, of the absolute silence of a snow-covered forest. He wasn't demanding anything of me. He was offering me a piece of his world, a world of wild, untamed freedom that was the very antithesis of my own. Slowly, impossibly, my frantic breathing began to even out. The crushing weight on my chest lessened. I found myself leaning subconsciously toward his strength, his scent of pine and power no longer a threat but a comfort. In the confines of that room, a fragile bond began to form, deeper than lust or fate, anchored in a shared moment of quiet vulnerability. Chapter 10. The Memory of a Lullaby. The fragile trust forged in the crucible of my panic attack changed something between us. I no longer saw Kalen as just a captor or a king, but as a reluctant ally, a guardian bound by a heavy past. The next morning, determined to be more than a terrified burden, I sat by the fire, the warm moonstone clutched in my hands. I closed my eyes and focused, not on the terrifying prospect of being a princess, but on the phantom sensations that name had unlocked. The scent of jasmine, a woman's voice. A melody surfaced. It was a simple, haunting tune, one I must have hummed to myself 1,000 times in the dark loneliness of the slave barracks without ever knowing its origin. Softly I began to hum it aloud. Kalen, who had been reviewing maps at the table, went utterly still. The parchment slipped from his fingers. He rose slowly, his golden eyes wide with a stunning combination of shock and triumph. "That song," he breathed, his voice tight with emotion. "Where did you hear that song?" "I don't know," I whispered, my own heart beginning to race. "It's just there. I've always known it." "That is the royal lullaby of Lunara," he said, his voice ringing with certainty. "My father taught it to me. It was known only to the Silver Moon family and their sworn guardians. It is the proof, Elina. It is the proof." He called me Elina, and for the first time the name didn't feel like a costume. It felt like a key turning in a lock deep inside me. Just as this monumental truth settled between us, there came a loud, formal pounding on the chamber door. One of Kalen's guards entered, carrying an ornate scroll sealed with the onyx wolf of the guild. He broke the seal and read its contents, his face grim. "It is a formal summons," Kalen announced, his voice turning to ice. "The Northern Guild, with Lord Valerius as their representative, demands a trial of legitimacy in the Grand Arena at midday. They will champion their claim of ownership. I am challenged to champion mine." It was a duel to the death, disguised as diplomacy. They meant to parade me before the entire citadel, to prove to the world that I was nothing more than a prize to be won. Kalen accepted without a moment's hesitation. He turned to me then, the grim resolve of a king at war etched onto his face. He strode across the room and cupped my face in his large, warm hands, forcing me to meet his gaze. His touch was both fiercely possessive and achingly reverent. "They want to show the world you are a possession," he said, his voice a low, dangerous rumble that promised violence. His thumb stroked my cheek, a gesture of impossible tenderness amidst the coming storm. "We will show them a queen." His golden eyes burned into mine. In their fiery depths, I saw not only his belief in me, but a reflection of a woman I didn't recognize. A woman of strength, of fire, of power. The frightened slave was receding, and in her place, someone new was awakening. He wasn't just fighting for me anymore. He was standing with me. The realization was a heady, intoxicating rush, and the promise of the coming battle, of what we would face together, hung between us, thick with danger, destiny, and a desire that threatened to burn the world to ash. Chapter 11. Forging a Queen. The hours leading up to the trial were a crucible. Kalen did not train me to fight with a sword. He trained me to fight with a presence. We stood in the center of the chamber, the remains of our breakfast untouched. "The arena is a theater," he began, his voice a low, commanding rumble. He circled me like a wolf assessing its territory. "Every lord, every merchant, every envoy will be watching. They expect to see a frightened slave. You will show them a woman who remembers her name." He taught me how to stand. "Your shoulders back. Your chin level. Do not look down. The ground holds no answers and no respect. You are the heir to a kingdom. Own the very stone you stand on." He taught me how to walk. Not the hurried scuffle of a servant, but the deliberate, measured pace of a ruler. Each step has a purpose. You are not fleeing or fetching. You are arriving. He taught me how to see. When Valerius speaks, you will not flinch. You will not look away. You will meet his gaze and see him for what he is, a thief standing in the presence of the woman he wronged. Let him see his own guilt reflected in your eyes. It was exhausting, terrifying work. Every instinct I had honed over 17 years screamed at me to be small, to be silent, to be invisible. Kalen was demanding the exact opposite. He was forcing me to unlearn a lifetime of survival tactics. To complete my transformation, he presented me with a tunic of the deepest midnight blue, almost black, made of a material that felt as soft as velvet but as strong as leather. Over it he placed a simple gorget of blackened steel to protect my throat, and a matching belt inlaid with a single unadorned piece of obsidian. As he fastened the clasp of the gorget at the nape of my neck, his fingers brushed against the brand. I flinched, the phantom heat of the iron rising on my skin. His hands stilled. He didn't move away. Instead, his thumb gently, deliberately stroked the scarred flesh. "This is not a mark of shame, Elina," he murmured, his voice so close it was a vibration against my skin. "It is a record of a crime. Today you will become the judge of the man who committed it." His proximity was overwhelming. I could feel the heat of his body, smell the intoxicating scent of pine and cold steel. The heart of the moon beneath my tunic grew warmer, sending a languid, molten heat spreading through my veins. It was a dizzying, dangerous sensation that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with the man standing behind me. The air grew thick with unspoken promises, the suspense of the coming battle tangled with the searing heat of the bond. He was arming me for war, but it felt as intimate as an embrace. When he finally stepped back, I felt his absence like a physical loss, and my skin tingled where he had touched me. Chapter 12. The Grand Arena. The walk to the arena was the longest of my life. I was flanked by Kalen and Gregor, with a phalanx of obsidian-clad guards forming a protective diamond around us. We moved through the citadel's corridors not as prisoners, but as a royal procession. Heads turned. Whispers followed us like the rustle of dry leaves. I followed Kalen's instructions, keeping my chin level and my gaze fixed forward, even as I felt hundreds of hostile eyes on me. The arena was a vast open-air circle of packed dirt and blood-soaked sand, surrounded by tiers of stone benches. It was a place built for brutal spectacle, and today I was the main attraction. The crowd roared as we entered, a mix of jeers from the Northern Guild supporters and curious murmurs from the Eastern envoys. On a raised dais opposite ours sat Lord Valerius. He was resplendent in furs and silks, a smug, proprietary smirk on his face. When his eyes met mine, he gave a slight, mocking bow as if to a favored pet. The insult was meant to shatter my composure, to remind me of my place. But as I looked at him, feeling the solid weight of Kaelin's presence beside me, I felt not the familiar terror of a slave, but a cold, sharp spike of anger. It was a new and startling sensation, and I held on to it like a weapon. "He believes he has already won," Kaelin murmured, his voice too low for anyone else to hear. "His arrogance is his weakness. Remember that." I could feel Kaelin's own state through the thrumming bond between us. He was a pillar of calm, controlled fury. His heart beat with a slow, steady rhythm, like a war drum waiting for the signal to begin. His power was a comforting blanket of heat at my back, a silent promise that I was no longer alone. We took our seats on the western dais, and a tense silence fell over the arena as a herald stepped into the center of the ring. The trial was about to begin. Chapter 13. The trial begins. "Let this trial of legitimacy commence," the herald bellowed, his voice echoing across the arena. "Lord Valerius of the Northern Trading Guild claims ownership of the slave girl known as Alara. King Kaelin Voorhees of the Obsidian Peaks contests this claim." Lord Valerius rose, his voice dripping with condescension as he addressed the assembled dignitaries. "My esteemed colleagues, what you see before you is a simple matter of property rights. The girl," he said, gesturing to me dismissively, "is a guild asset born and bred for service. The savage king of the West, in an act of base thievery, has stolen what is mine. I am here merely to reclaim what I own." Every word was a nail in the coffin of my old life. He was stripping me of my name, my humanity, reducing me to a ledger entry. I felt the eyes of the crowd on me, judging me, dismissing me. My hands clenched in the fabric of my tunic. Then Kaelin stood. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. His power filled the arena, silencing the murmurs of the crowd. "There is no slave girl here," he declared, his voice like the grinding of tectonic plates. "You stand in the presence of Elina Silvermoon, the last surviving heir of the royal house of Lunara, and the rightful queen of the South." A collective gasp swept through the arena, followed by an uproar of shock and disbelief. Valerius paled, his smug expression faltering for the first time. The herald, recovering his composure, moved the proceedings along. "The guild invokes the right of combat to settle this dispute. They put forth a champion to fight for their claim." A massive, barred gate on the far side of the arena groaned open. Out stepped a mountain of a man, his chest and arms a roadmap of scars, his face a mask of brutal cruelty. He carried a monstrous, double-bladed axe. "The guild's champion," Gregor growled beside me, "is Torvin the Breaker. He enjoys his work." Valerius's smirk returned, more malevolent than before. This was his plan. He wouldn't risk his own skin. He would use this brute to crush Kaelin, to reclaim me, and to humiliate us both before the entire political world. The trial of legitimacy was a sham. It was an execution. Chapter 14. The Alpha's Fury. Kaelin descended into the arena, armed with only a long sword and a round shield bearing the obsidian peak of his house. He moved with a fluid, predatory grace that was the polar opposite of Torvin's lumbering, brutish power. The bell rang and the fight began. It was a clash of lightning and thunder. Torvin swung his massive axe in devastating arcs, each blow meant to shatter bone and pulverize flesh. Kaelin was a blur of motion, dodging, weaving, his shield deflecting the crushing impacts with jarring clangs of steel that echoed in my bones. He was not just fighting, he was hunting, waiting for an opening. Every time Torvin's axe came close, every grunt of exertion from Kaelin, I felt it as if it were happening to me. The mate bond was a raw, open nerve, transmitting a phantom echo of the battle into my very soul. When Torvin's shield strap broke and he managed to land a glancing blow on Kaelin's side with his mailed fist, a sharp, searing pain erupted in my own ribs, and I gasped, clutching my side. From his dais, Valerius laughed, a cruel, ugly sound. "You see, your champion bleeds." Soon he will break and you will be back where you belong on your knees. His words fueled my cold anger. I watched the fight with a desperate, heightened focus. Kalen was faster, smarter, but Torvin's brute strength was relentless. He was forcing Kalen onto the defensive. The heart of the moon beneath my tunic began to burn, its heat spreading through me, sharpening my senses. The roar of the crowd faded away, and all I could see was the deadly dance in the sand. I saw what Kalen couldn't. Torvin was a creature of habit. Before every powerful downward swing of his axe, he shifted his weight to his back right foot, a subtle, almost imperceptible telegraph of his most devastating attack. Kalen was too close, too focused on deflecting the flurry of blows, to see the pattern. Torvin was preparing for that final, shield-splintering, killing strike. My heart seized in terror. He was going to kill him. Chapter 15, A Queen's Gambit. Panic and a strange, primal power surged through me in a searing wave. The moonstone felt like a hot coal against my skin. I could not let him die. I would not. I shot to my feet. All the lessons Kalen had taught me, stand tall, own your space, project your voice, converged in a single desperate moment. Drawing a breath that seemed to pull power from the very air around me, I did not scream a warning. I issued a command. Thou, Kalen. My voice was not the reedy whisper of a slave. It was a clear, resonant cry of command, imbued with an unnatural, echoing authority that cut through the din of the arena like a whip crack. It was the voice of a queen. For a fatal half-second, everyone, including Torvin the Breaker, looked at me in stunned surprise. His momentum faltered. His eyes, full of bloodlust, flickered from Kalen to me. It was the opening. Kalen didn't hesitate. He did not look at me. He trusted the opening my voice had created. In that sliver of a second he lunged forward, not away from the axe but under it. He dropped his shield, his sword flashing in a deadly upward arc that slid beneath Torvin's guard. The fight was over. The brute fell to the sand, his lifeblood staining the ground. Silence. A profound, absolute silence descended upon the grand arena. The crowd was stunned not just by the swift, brutal conclusion of the fight, but by my role in it. They had all heard it. The voice of command. The voice of power. Lord Valerius stared at me, his face a mask of disbelief and dawning horror. I was not supposed to do that. Property was supposed to be silent. In the center of the ring, Kalen stood over his vanquished foe, his chest heaving. He was splattered with blood and sweat, a terrifying and magnificent figure of victory. Slowly he turned his head and his burning golden eyes, the eyes of the Alpha King, rose from the dead man at his feet and locked with mine across the arena. There was no question in his gaze, no surprise. There was only a fierce, blazing pride, a raw possession that had nothing to do with ownership, and a desire so potent it promised to burn my entire world down to ash, leaving only him. The trial was over. He had won the fight, but I had won the war. Chapter 16. The Shattering of Chains. The silence in the arena was a living thing, heavy and profound. Kalen stood in the center of the ring, a blood-soaked avenger, his golden eyes locked on mine. In that gaze, 1,000 unspoken vows were made. He was mine and I was his. It was a truth more solid than the stone walls around us. Then he moved. He didn't return to the dais. He didn't acknowledge the herald or the stunned crowd. With deliberate, menacing steps, he began to walk directly toward Lord Valerius. Panic erupted on the northern dais. Valerius scrambled backward in his chair, his face ashen, the last of his smug arrogance dissolving into pure animal terror. Kalen didn't draw his sword. He didn't need to. His very presence was a weapon, a promise of imminent and terrible retribution. He stopped at the foot of the dais, planting his feet in the blood-soaked sand, and looked up at the man who had owned me. This trial was a farce, Kalen's voice boomed, carrying to every corner of the arena. You brought forth a champion not to test a claim but to commit murder. And you attempted to orchestrate the death of a rightful monarch. As he spoke, something compelled me to move. I descended the steps from my own dais, my movements steady and sure. The crowd parted before me as I walked onto the sand, the grit a strange comfort beneath my boots. I did not go to Kalen's side. I walked to the center of the ring, to the spot where he had just won our freedom, and I turned to face my former master. My name, I said, and my voice, the Queen's voice, rang out clear and strong, is Elina Silvermoon. The name Alara was the name of your slave. That girl is dead. I reached up and pulled the collar of my tunic aside, deliberately exposing the ugly raised brand on my neck for all to see. I met Valerius's terrified gaze. You branded a princess with the mark of your guild. This was not an act of ownership. This was an act of treason against the throne of Lunara. The political calculus in the arena shifted in an instant. This was no longer a squabble over property. This was a story of a lost princess, of a kingdom stolen, of a crime against royalty. I saw it in the eyes of the Eastern envoys who now leaned forward, their expressions alight with rapt, calculating interest. I had given them a new player in the game, a new piece on the board. Valerius opened his mouth, but no words came out. He was no longer a lord facing a barbarian king. He was a criminal facing his judge. And behind me, I could feel the heat of Kaelin's burning pride, a silent, powerful endorsement of the queen he was forging in the fire of this arena. Chapter 17. An alliance forged in blood. Back in the suffocating intimacy of our chambers, the adrenaline of the trial left a heavy, electric tension in its wake. Kaelin shed his armor piece by piece, the clang of steel on the stone floor echoing the frantic beat of my heart. A deep gash on his side, left by Torvin's mailed fist, was bleeding sluggishly. "Let me," I whispered, my voice hoarse. I took a clean cloth and a bowl of water from the servant's basin. He sat on the edge of the bed, watching me with an unnerving intensity as I knelt before him. My hands trembled as I carefully cleaned the wound. His skin was scorching hot beneath my fingers, his muscles coiled like steel cables. My proximity to his raw, masculine power was intoxicating. He was the most dangerous man I had ever known, and yet I had never felt safer. He hissed as I pressed the cloth to the wound, and his hand shot out not to stop me but to grip my shoulder. The contact was a brand of its own, possessive and grounding. The heart of the moon pulsed with a slow, molten rhythm, a silent song of recognition and desire. Gregor burst in, his one eye alight with excitement. "The guild is in chaos. They're calling Valerius a fool who has doomed them all. Better yet," he said, holding up a scroll, "the Eastern delegation requests an audience. Not just with you, my king. With both of you." The meeting was held in a neutral chamber. We sat across a polished table from a delegation led by a sharp, elegant woman named Ambassador Serina. Her eyes missed nothing. She addressed her questions to me. "A convenient story, the lost princess," she began, her tone skeptical. "What proof do you offer beyond the word of your champion?" I met her gaze without flinching, Kaelin's silent strength a rock at my back. "The proof is in the guild's records. They stole a child from a burning palace 17 years ago. The proof is in the lullaby only a Silver Moon royal would know." I paused, then added, my voice turning to ice, "And the proof is in their desperation to silence me. I spoke not of my suffering but of my intentions. I will restore the kingdom of Lunara. I will reopen the trade routes to all, not just the guild's cronies. I propose a new order. A sovereign south, allied with the western mountains, with the east as a valued and equal partner to ensure the north can never again hold a blade to the throat of this continent." As I spoke, I felt Kaelin's hand come to rest on the back of my chair. It was a subtle gesture, unseen by the ambassadors, but I felt it in every nerve of my body. It was an act of possession, of support, of unity. We would do this. Ambassador Serina watched me, a slow, calculating smile spreading across her lips. She wasn't just looking at a former slave. She was looking at the future. Chapter 18. The Moonstone's Secret. The meeting with the Eastern envoys left me drained but humming with a strange new power. Alone with Kaelin once more, I pulled the moonstone from beneath my tunic. It was no longer a dull black rock with a faint inner light. Now a vibrant silver luminescence pulsed from its core, casting soft ripples of light on the ceiling. "The bond between us is the key," Kaelin said, his voice a low, reverent murmur. "Your blood awakens it, but my presence, the presence of your fated mate, unlocks its power. It's a repository, Elina. A vault of your ancestors' memories." A tremor of fear and longing went through me. "How?" "Let me show you," he said. He sat beside me on a settee, his thigh pressing against mine. The contact sent a shock of heat through me. "Hold the stone. Close your eyes. Don't search for anything. Just listen." I did as he asked, my breath catching as he covered my hand with his own. His touch was the catalyst. The moment his skin met mine over the stone, the world dissolved. I was no longer in the room. I saw a woman with my face and hair the color of spun moonlight, holding the stone up to a full moon, her lips moving in a silent chant. My mother. I saw a man with warm, laughing eyes and a neatly trimmed dark beard, pressing a small carved wooden wolf into my tiny hand. My father. I smelled jasmine and felt the scratch of a wool blanket in a hidden alcove. A loyal guard with a bleeding face was whispering, "Be silent, little princess. For your kingdom, be silent." Then came fire, screaming, and the brutal, wrenching loss of everything I had ever known. I was torn from the vision with a gasp, tears streaming down my face. Kaelin was holding me, his strong arms a grounding anchor in the storm of resurrected grief. I was shaking uncontrollably, but the tears were not just of sorrow. They were tears of validation. I was no longer a girl with a stolen past. I was a woman who remembered her name, her face, her parents' love. I looked up at Kaelin, my fierce guardian, my king, my mate. The memories the stone had shown me were a priceless gift, but the man holding me was my future. Chapter 19. The Price of Treason. The next morning the political world remade itself. Gregor brought the news. Facing a war on two fronts, the Northern Trading Guild had officially denounced Lord Valerius, stripping him of his titles and naming him a rogue agent. They offered a formal apology and significant reparations to the long-lost Queen Elina Silvermoon, a desperate bid to avoid a war they now knew they could not win. Valerius, however, had vanished. "He's a cornered rat," Kaelin growled. "And cornered rats are dangerous." He posted extra guards, but a sense of unease settled over our wing of the citadel. We were poring over maps of the southern kingdoms, a new energy crackling between us as we planned for a future that suddenly seemed real. I pointed to a trade route near the coast, and as Kaelin leaned over my shoulder to see, his hair brushed my cheek and his scent filled my senses. The casual intimacy sent a fresh wave of heat through me. A servant entered, bearing a flagon of wine and 2 goblets on a silver tray. I recognized him vaguely from the kitchens. He kept his eyes downcast, his movements stiff and unnatural. Kaelin's head came up, his nostrils flaring. He scented it before I saw it, the cloying aroma of fierce sweat. "That's close enough," Kaelin said, his voice deceptively calm. The servant froze. His eyes, wide with terror, darted toward a heavy tapestry depicting a winter hunt. It was all the warning we got. With a roar of pure hatred, Lord Valerius burst from behind the tapestry. He was no longer a preening lord but a wild-eyed madman, his fine clothes torn, his face contorted with insane rage. In his hand was a wicked-looking dagger, its tip glistening with a dark oily poison. He lunged not at Kaelin but at me. "If I can't have my property," he shrieked, his voice cracking, "and no one will." Chapter 20. Blood and Vows. Time seemed to slow to a crawl. Kaelin was moving, a blur of shadow and fury, but Valerius had the advantage of surprise. He was too close. I wouldn't have time to scream. Instinct, honed by a lifetime of anticipating violence, took over. My hand shot out and grabbed the heavy silver flagon of wine from the servant's tray. With all my strength I threw it at Valerius's head. It struck him on the shoulder with a sickening thud, the impact causing his lunge to falter for a precious second. It was all the time Kaelin needed. A snarl ripped from Kaelin's throat, a sound so primal and full of feral rage that it was no longer human. He slammed into Valerius and the 2 men crashed to the floor. The poisoned dagger skittered across the stones. The fight was brutally short. I heard the sharp crack of bone as Kaelin broke Valerius's wrist, followed by a choked scream of agony. When it was over, Kaelin hauled the whimpering, broken man to his feet by the throat, his knuckles white. He was shaking with the force of his protective fury. He dragged Valerius and threw him at my feet. "His life is forfeit for raising a hand against you," Kaelin growled, his golden eyes blazing, fixed on me. "The judgment is yours, my queen." I looked down at the pathetic, weeping creature who had branded me, who had sold me, who had tried to murder me. The slave girl Alara would have begged for his death. But I was not her. "You will not be granted the mercy of a quick death," I said, my voice as cold and hard as the obsidian on Kaelin's belt. "You will be sentenced to a life of hard labor in the deepest salt mines of the Western Mountains. You will feel the weight of chains, You will know the sting of a lash, and you will learn the value of the freedom you so eagerly stole from others." The guards dragged him away, his horrified screams echoing down the hall. We were left alone in the aftermath, the air thick with the scent of spilled wine and blood. The last of my fear, the last of my old life had been exorcised. Kalen turned to me, his eyes still burning with the residual fire of the fight. He crossed the room in 2 long strides, cupped my face in his hands and crashed his mouth down on mine. It was not a gentle kiss. It was a raw, bruising collision of relief, possession and frantic, pent-up passion. It was the roar of the alpha claiming his mate, the vow of a guardian who had almost failed, the desperate grounding of 2 souls who had walked through fire and found each other on the other side. He kissed me as if he wanted to devour me, to brand me with his own mark, and I kissed him back with all the stored-up hunger of a woman who had been starved her entire life, finally tasting freedom, power, and a love as fierce and wild as the king who held her. Chapter 21. A Kingdom to Reclaim. The kiss had shattered the last barrier between us. It was a raw, desperate claiming that had stripped away the titles of king and queen, leaving only a man and a woman bound by a force more powerful than any crown. In the aftermath of Valerius's attack, the air in our chambers was thick with a new, searing intimacy. Every glance was charged, every accidental touch a spark threatening to ignite a wildfire. The suspense of survival had been replaced by the heart-stopping suspense of what we were becoming to each other. Kalen tended to the scrapes on my arms from the fall, his touch now unhesitatingly possessive. "When I saw him lunge at you," he admitted, his voice a low, rough growl, his golden eyes dark with the memory, "I felt my soul tear. In that moment I would have burned the world to the ground to save you. Not for an oath. Not for a kingdom. For you." His vulnerability was more intoxicating than any display of power. It was the confession of a fierce, untamed heart that now beat only for me. I reached up, my fingers tracing the hard line of his jaw. "You didn't just save me, Kalen. You showed me how to save myself." Our planning shifted from defense to offense. Maps of the South were spread across every surface, detailing the territories that had once been the kingdom of Lunara. With the full backing of the Eastern Alliance, our path was clear. We would march south not as a conquering army but as a liberating one. We would dismantle the last vestiges of the Northern Trading Guild's power and restore the throne. My throne. That night sleep was impossible. The nearness of him in the quiet dark was a sweet torment. I saw him standing by the window, a massive silhouette against the moonlit snow, the weight of his own kingdom and now mine resting on his broad shoulders. I went to him, sliding my arms around his waist from behind, pressing my cheek against the hard muscle of his back. He went rigid for a moment, then relaxed into my touch, covering my hands with his own. "We will do this together, Elina," he murmured. "As equals," I whispered, the words of vow. He turned in my arms, his hands framing my face, his thumbs stroking my cheekbones with an aching tenderness. "I have never known an equal," he confessed, his gaze burning with an emotion so intense it stole my breath. "I have known subjects, allies and enemies, but never a partner." He lowered his head, his lips brushing against mine, a stark contrast to the brutal passion of our first kiss. This was different. It was a question, a plea, a promise. "Be my partner. Be my queen. Be my everything." I answered him with a kiss that sealed our pact, a slow, deep exploration of a future forged not in subjugation, but in a shared sovereignty of the soul. He lifted me into his arms as if I weighed nothing and carried me to the bed. There, in the firelit darkness of our gilded cage, we claimed each other completely. It was not the taking of a king or the surrender of a slave. It was the union of 2 halves of a single fierce soul, a sacred and steamy consummation of a bond that would remake the world. Chapter 22. The March of the 2 Sovereigns. We left the Frostvang citadel not as fugitives, but as the leaders of a revolution. A vast army marched at our backs, a stunning tapestry of power. There were the grim, disciplined warriors of Kalen's western clans in their obsidian armor, marching alongside the elegantly equipped soldiers of the Eastern Alliance. At the head of it all, 2 banners flew side by side against the cold sky, the stark, unforgiving peak of the Varys clan, and the reborn crest of a silver wolf baying at a crescent moon. The journey south was a revelation. With every league we traveled, the landscape softened from frozen tundra to green, rolling hills. We were not met with resistance. We were met with hope. News of the trial had spread like wildfire. Tales of a lost princess and a fearsome alpha king who championed her cause had given rise to whispers of rebellion. We liberated towns where guild masters had ruled with an iron fist, and the welcome we received was overwhelming. In a town called Riverbend, we freed a pen of slaves destined for the northern mines. Their eyes held the same hollowed-out despair I had known my entire life. While Kalen and Gregor oversaw the distribution of supplies, I walked to them. They flinched from me, their heads bowed, expecting a new master. "I am Elina Silvermoon," I said, my voice quiet but firm. I pushed up my sleeve, showing them not a brand, but the faded scars and calluses that would never truly disappear. For 17 years I was a slave. I slept on straw, I ate scraps, and I wore a brand that declared I was property. I know your fear. I know your pain. But today that ends. You are not property. You are the free people of Lunara. Tears streamed down their faces as they looked up, truly seeing me for the first time. They saw not a distant queen in fine clothes but a sister in survival. In that moment I cemented a loyalty more powerful than any army. Kalen watched from a distance, his face filled with a fierce, unwavering pride that was a balm to my soul. Our nights were spent in a large command tent, a bubble of intimacy amidst the sprawling military camp. There, surrounded by maps and battle plans, we found our solace in each other. One night, a storm raged outside, the rain hammering against the canvas. Kalen was tense, the weight of the coming siege pressing on him. I came up behind him as he stared at a map of my capital city, and began to massage the tight cords of muscle in his shoulders. He leaned into my touch with a sigh, his head falling back. "This city is your birthright," he murmured. "I will not fail you in reclaiming it." "We will not fail," I corrected him, turning him to face me. The lantern light cast dancing shadows across the planes of his face, making his golden eyes gleam. I rose on my toes and kissed him, a slow, reassuring promise that we were in this together. The kiss deepened, becoming a desperate, passionate escape from the pressures waiting for us at dawn. We made love with the storm as our witness, our bodies a testament to the life and heat that existed in defiance of the cold war we were waging, our bond the quiet, unshakable center of the hurricane. Chapter 23. The Gates of Lunara. We crested a hill and my breath caught in my throat. There, nestled in a valley, was the capital city of Lunara. A great wall of silver-white stone encircled it, and at its heart, the spires of the Silvermoon Palace rose toward the sky like elegant fingers of bone. It was my home. I knew it with a certainty that was bone-deep, a resonance that sang in my blood and echoed in the pulsing of the moonstone against my chest. But the city was a wounded animal. The guild's onyx wolf banner flew from the highest tower, a blight upon the landscape, and a palpable sense of decay hung over the walls. The remaining guild forces, led by a ruthless lieutenant of Valerius named Commander Heston, had sealed the main gates and prepared for a long siege. They believed their walls were impregnable. They were wrong. That night, in the command tent, Kalen and his generals discussed plans for a frontal assault, talking of battering rams and siege towers. I closed my eyes, clutching the heart of the moon. "No," I said, my voice cutting through their discussion. All eyes turned to me. I took a deep, steadying breath and let the moonstone's memories flow. The palace was built for beauty, but my ancestors were not fools. They knew beauty invites envy. I walked to the map and placed my finger on a spot on the western wall, far from the main gate, where a small, forgotten river flowed out from beneath the city. "There is a culvert here, sealed with a grate that looks ancient and impassable. But it opens with a key. Not a metal key, but a magical one." I looked at Kalen. "The moonstone. It will react to the silver ore in the grate's locking mechanism. My mother showed me once, in a memory I didn't know I had. It's a secret escape route, leading directly into the palace cellars." A thrill of dangerous excitement passed through the tent. It was a mad gamble, but it was our best chance to avoid a bloody, protracted siege that would devastate the city and its people. Kalen's eyes gleamed with pride and predatory anticipation. "A queen knows the secrets of her own castle," he said with a wolfish grin. It was decided. Kalen, Gregor, and I would lead a small elite team of 20 warriors through the tunnel at midnight. The suspense was a physical thing, a knot of fear and exhilaration in my gut. As we prepared, cloaked in black, Kalen checked the straps of my leather armor himself. His hands were steady, but his eyes were blazing with a fierce, protective light. "Stay by my side," he commanded, his voice a low growl. "Always," I promised. We moved through the darkness like ghosts. The grate was exactly where the memory had shown me. It was rusted and covered in moss, looking as if it hadn't been touched in a century. I pressed the moonstone against a small, almost invisible carving of a crescent moon on the lock. For a moment nothing happened. Then the stone blazed with silver light, and with a low groan of ancient grinding stone, the grate swung inward, revealing a dark watery maw. Together we descended into the forgotten belly of my ancestral home, ready to reclaim it from the inside out. Chapter 24. The Battle for the Throne Room. The tunnels were a cold, damp maze, but the moonstone's glow and the memories it provided guided us unerringly through the darkness. We emerged into the palace's cavernous wine cellars, the air thick with the scent of dust and soured wine. The element of surprise was ours. We moved swiftly and silently up through the palace's servant corridors, a wave of dark, vengeful ghosts. The battle, when it began in the grand hallways, was swift and brutal. Kalen's warriors were the most elite fighters in the world, and the guild soldiers, expecting a siege from without, were caught completely off guard. Kalen fought like the incarnation of a war god, his sword a blur of silver, every movement a symphony of lethal grace. He moved to protect me, but he also seemed to understand that this was my fight. He created openings for me, herding enemies into my path. I was not a trained warrior, but I was a survivor. I fought with a desperate ferocity, my movements economical and vicious, using a dagger I had taken from a fallen guard. I fought for the mother I could now remember, for the father whose laughter echoed in my soul, and for the 17 years that had been stolen from me. We fought our way to the heart of the palace, the throne room. It was here that Commander Heston had made his last stand, surrounded by his personal guard. The vast chamber was a place of ghosts for me. It was here my parents had died. At the far end, two magnificent thrones of silver and moonstone sat empty. Heston was a desperate man, his face pale with sweat. "A ghost," he snarled, pointing his sword at me. "You're a lie made up by a barbarian to steal what is ours." As his guards charged, the battle became a chaotic swirl of steel and shouting. Kalen was a whirlwind of destruction, defending me while felling two men at once. I found myself facing Heston directly. He was larger, stronger, a seasoned killer. He disarmed me with a flick of his wrist, my dagger clattering away. He lunged, his sword aimed at my heart. In that split second I didn't cower. I didn't scream. I thrust my hand forward, the heart of the moon blazing. An arc of pure, white-hot moonlight erupted from the stone, striking Heston in the chest. It wasn't a lethal blast, but it was blinding, disorienting, and threw him off balance with the force of a physical blow. He staggered back, roaring in pain and confusion, his eyes seared by the magical light. It was the only opening Kalen needed. He was there in a heartbeat, his sword ending Heston's treason with a single decisive thrust. Silence fell, broken only by the ragged breaths of the survivors. The last of the guild forces surrendered. I stood in the center of the throne room, my hand outstretched, the moonstone pulsing with a soft, triumphant light. Kalen came to me, his sword dripping, his face grim. He took my hand, his thumb stroking the stone that had saved me. "The palace is yours, Elena," he said, his voice thick with emotion. The battle was over. The kingdom was reborn. Chapter 25. A Vow Sealed by the Moon. There was no grand, formal coronation with velvet robes and golden crowns. That was the way of the old world, a world of masters and subjects. We would begin a new one. Days later, after the city had been secured and the people freed, we stood on the great balcony of the Silver Moon Palace. Below us, the main courtyard was filled not with lords and ladies, but with our combined army, the citizens of Lunara, and hundreds of former slaves whose chains now lay broken. The full moon, larger and brighter than I had ever seen it, bathed the scene in an ethereal silver light. I did not wear a gown, but the same practical leather armor I had fought in, my birthright reclaimed not by blood alone, but by will and by steel. Kalen stood beside me not as a conqueror but as my partner. He turned to the crowd, his alpha's voice needing no amplification. "You have known me as the king of the Obsidian Peaks. I came to the north to right a generation's old wrong. But I found more than a lost princess. I found my queen, my equal, my soul. He turned to me, his molten gold eyes filled with a love so profound it was a physical force. I do not offer you my protection as a guardian. I pledge you my sword, my heart, and my life as your co-sovereign. We will rule together or not at all. My heart swelled and I took his hand, holding it high for all to see. I am Elina Silvermoon. I stand before you not as a queen who was saved, but as a woman who has returned home. The age of slavery is over. The age of chains is over. A roar of approval rose from the crowd, a tidal wave of joyous, unbridled hope. I looked at Kaelin, my king, my love. I accept your vow, Kaelin Varys, and I pledge you mine. My heart, my magic, and my kingdom are yours as you are mine. Not master and servant. Not king and consort. But two halves of one whole, united to forge a future of justice and freedom. As we spoke our vows, I raised my other hand, the heart of the moon resting in my palm. It began to glow, its light growing from a soft pulse to a brilliant, celestial beacon that rivaled the moon above. A collective gasp went through the crowd as the light washed over them, a tangible blessing from the goddess herself. We sealed our union not with the exchange of rings, but with a deep, searing kiss, a public declaration of a love that had sparked a revolution. The roar of the people was deafening. Looking out from the balcony, hand in hand with my king, my partner, I saw our forward horizon. It was a world remade, a realm where lineage, love, and law converged. The slave girl named Elara was a ghost, a memory. I was Elina Silvermoon, Queen of Lunara, and the bond between my Alpha King and me would not just be a story whispered in the dark, but the beacon of a new era.